Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder as I step off the train and deliver an episode to you while I walk home. I'm Brendan Riley. Well, good evening, dear listeners. It is a lovely night here in suburban Chicago. The weather is cool, not super warm, but nice nonetheless. I'm without hat and without gloves and not uncomfortable, although if I had a hat, I wouldn't be uncomfortable either. It's right on that borderline. Nonetheless, lovely night. Glad to be recording for you. This is my second episode I've recorded today, so I'm trying to stack them up so they'll come out kind of every day because I'm a little behind. I think this will be episode 382, and I try to get 100 episodes a year in, and I usually end up stopping recording in around December 20th and take a month-long hiatus. So we'll see how I do. So my idea today, I was thinking about this because I recently had a gameplay that made me think about this. And so what I wanted to talk about today is moments or kinds of games that manufacture a moment of missed it by that much. I don't know if you've ever seen Get Smart, especially the original one. One of the main character's main Maxwell Smart's catchphrases was missed it by that much. Often he missed it by a lot. That's part of the joke. But the idea that you almost got there but didn't quite get there. It's sort of corollary to what I've often talked about in a number of episodes is my favorite game feeling, which is almost enough. Or not quite enough. The idea that when you're playing, you encounter a element in the game where you are trying to manipulate what you're doing to get just enough to be able to achieve all of your goals. I find that super satisfying. For example, I just finished an online game of Chocolate Factory, and in the final round, I needed to have 6 of the finger chocolates, 3 of the red chocolates, 3 of the blue box chocolates, and then some number of other chocolates that I could use to do well in the shop that I was going for. And if I really wanted to do well, I needed to get at least 3 chocolates into that shop because my opponent only had 1. And the way that Chocolate Factory works, if you have more than double what the next person down has, they don't get the bonus for that round. And I had taken the card that let me play there, but that card gave me double for whatever I get. So I only had to have 2, and that turned out to be exactly what I needed. I had 8 finger chocolates, not 6. So I was able to put 6 toward the contracts. I was able to put the 3 reds toward the second contract, the 3 blues toward the third contract. And then I was able to put 2 remaining finger chocolates into the location, which counted as 4, which meant that my opponent did not get the bonus for that location. Now that was actually kind of mean because I'd played before and they hadn't. It was actually regular listener Gabriel Edge. Hey Gabriel, I had just enough to weasel you out of those 8 points. Sorry about that, but that's my feeling of just enough. Like you're just trying to wrangle everything to get the exact thing that you need. But sometimes you don't quite get there, and that's what I want to talk about today: is moments of perilous effort and razor-thin losses. So the first one I want to talk about is my ongoing and traumatic experience of playing Through the Ages with Ray Greenlee. I think Ray listens sometimes. Hey, Ray. Ray is an incredibly accomplished Through the Ages player, has hundreds of plays under his belt. I myself have I have about 80 plays with Ray asynchronously on Board Game Arena over the last couple of years. And as I've mentioned many times, I won once so far of those 80 plays. However, the last play that we had, the game before the current game that I'm on right now, I was so close. I think that if I'd had one more turn, which I thought I was going to get, I'm still very bad at judging when the game is going to end. I think if I'd had one more turn, I would have won because I could have boosted my rewards a little bit more, and my main guy, I had Bill Gates as my leader, and he gave off more bonus points at the end. So I think if I'd had one more turn, I could have boosted that a little bit more and maybe brought the final score closer together. As it was, the margin was like 10 points or something, which is really close in Through the Ages. It's not uncommon for the margin to be 50 points or 60 points. So the fact that I only lost by 10 points was kind of excruciating, but it did make me feel like missed it by that much. And that was the impetus for today's episode. And I want to talk about a few more times that I've experienced that or inflicted that on other people. Another experience like that we had recently, I have mentioned a number of times that my family likes to play the Harry Potter Hogwarts Battle, the deck building game, that we have purchased both expansions for it and worked our way through all of the different expansion material. We are currently on the last game of the Charms and Potions expansion, which is the second one. So we are one win away from having completed the whole game. It's pretty exciting. But here's the kicker. We have found that the Potions and Charms expansion was actually pretty easy. And the Monster Box of Monsters had been brutally hard. We found that one to be really hard. And so we had gotten used to bumping our decks a little bit. We put in an extra card at the beginning just to give us a little juice to make it fun, because we are not a group that finds brutally hard co-ops fun. So we bumped it a little bit. And we eventually got through the Monster Box of Monsters. I think the 4 adventures took us maybe 8 plays, 7 plays, something like that. And then the Charms and Potions expansion, because the Monster Box of Monsters had been so hard, we started with the decks goosed a little bit just because we were used to playing that way. Well, turns out the Charms and Potions was way easier. So we breezed through the first one. We eased back on our deck bumping a little, breezed through the second one, eased back to, I think, the third one. We started with nothing, no extras, and we still breezed through and won. I mean, it took a long time, but we stayed ahead of it and won. And then we got to the fourth one. And I guess a little bit of spoilers here for the 4th box of the Harry Potter Charms and Potions expansion, because the way they do it is the challenges that you're facing are part of these closed boxes that you open up as you get there. So I guess if you don't want to hear about the 4th box, I'm going to talk a little bit about the challenges. You could skip and the way that the final Voldemort is rendered. You could skip forward a couple minutes and not hear that. I will try to keep it short. So here's your chance to skip forward. So the cards that reveal in the Charms and Potions expansion pack 4, the challenges, one of the challenges, the second one, involves encountering 4 of the cards at the same time, which isn't something you normally do. Normally you encounter like 1 or 2 of the enemy cards. You had to resolve 4 in the same turn in order to beat that, which meant that the game motivated you to allow the first location to slip past, because the first location you're only drawing 1 card. Once you get to the second location, you're drawing 2 cards, and it's much more brutal. I mean, it really gets much harder after that. And we ended up letting the first location fail so that we could get to the second location where we're drawing 2 cards. And then we also kept Bellatrix Lestrange in play, who makes you draw an extra location, so that we were drawing 3 every turn with the hopes of having one of those make us draw a 4th. And it took several turns before we got one that made us draw a 4th, which meant we were drawing 3 a turn for a while, which was brutal. It really knocked apart our defenses in pretty significant ways, because we've discovered that the main key to the Harry Potter Hogwarts battle is staying on location 1 as long as you possibly can. As soon as you're drawing 2 enemy cards every round, the timer has started. So having to do that as the second of the 3 enemy encounters was really rough. And then we got to the final Voldemort, and the final Voldemort, as his thing, did as much damage as there were skull tokens on the location, which is just outrageous. It was so much damage that we had to soak every turn, and it was short work for Voldemort to get rid of us. We ended up getting clobbered pretty quickly, and the game was over. The thing was, we had resolved everything else. We killed every other villain. We got pretty good stuff into our decks. We resolved all 3 encounters. We just had Voldemort left to go. So given that we hadn't goosed our decks at all and we weren't prepared for this terrible run of torture that the game throws at you, it was pretty good. And I felt like we missed it by that much. We really could have won with just a couple other cards that came up. So really fun, but that's what that was. Next up, I wanted to talk about a game where this was a rules mistake. I missed the rules explanation by that much. So I think I've mentioned before that the game Biblios is a game that I enjoy. And at one point I had taught my wife and mother-in-law how to play Biblios. And in discussing the game, there was a question about money. And in the game itself, money is not worth anything. However, it turns out money is the tiebreaker, and I did not know that. And so my mother-in-law spent all her money, and my wife did not, and we got to the tiebreaker, and my wife had money left, and my mother-in-law did not, so my wife won, and there were some bad feelings because I hadn't said that the money was the tiebreaker. Now, there's an argument to be made that by spending all her money, she was able to get enough stuff that she was able to get into the position to tie, but whatever. Maybe she would have spent less and still done that. But it made me feel bad, and it did remind me that walking through endgame scoring and walking through tie-breaking conditions is one of the things I need to do every time I teach a game. And at least that way, when somebody said, oh, I didn't know it worked that way, I can be like, well, I told you it worked that way. The fact that you didn't hear or it didn't sink in, well, games are complicated. But at least I revealed the idea in the proper way. And so that became the crucial part of my conversation or my way of thinking about teaching. But it came that way, because of that close call in how I taught Biblios, that missed a good rules teach by that much. The other thing that ends up being a key part of gameplay and the thing that becomes the dramatic moments are the close wins. And I don't know how often this happens in your family, but in my family, we keep track of wins, we keep track of scores, and so a win feels like a big deal. But, destruction, when you win by 20 or 30% of the other person's score, doesn't feel like that big a deal. But when you win by 1 point, or you win in a tiebreaker, oh man, that feels amazing. To count up those scores and be like, I got 65, well, I got 66, boom! It feels awesome. At the same time, as the other player is the one getting 65, ooh, it's a brutal sting, right? Because you can't help but think about like, well, what if I'd made this choice instead of that one? Because a lot of games, you're trading efficiency in scoring for efficiency in play. Like you don't want to make the other person sit too long while you puzzle out what the possible scores might be. And so working through those scores becomes an exercise in rough estimations and guessing. And sometimes later in the game you realize, oh, if I'd gone that other way, I would have saved that much. Or there's a point, like late in the game of Seven Wonders, for instance, where I realized that spending some money to be able to play a card, I need to calculate how many points that card's going to get me, because the money itself is also worth points. Three money to a point, I believe. So if I'm spending 6 money on a card, it better be worth more than 2 points. Otherwise, I've wasted that money. And I think that sort of thing becomes an issue throughout as you play games. Now, most games, I would say, have a pretty clear line where spending money or spending resources usually gives you access to something that is worth more points than the money or resources would have been. But in a game like Concordia, the difference between those two is often very narrow, and spending a little bit more to get one more card that will score on a particular way, there's a lot of nuance there that really can result in a feeling of missed it by that much. I think the granddaddy of all of these kinds of games, the granddaddy of that feeling, is Power Grid. If you haven't played Power Grid, it is a game of math. It is a game of figuring out how much money do I need to save in order to be able to do what I want to do, in order to buy exactly the right resources. How much is it going to cost? I've mentioned Brass Birmingham and Brass Lancashire as games of not quite enough, or just enough. Games where you're trying to squeak out every single dollar, trying to figure out how much things are going to cost, trying to find that little bit of edge to get you that one more thing that will push you over the edge in points. Power Grid is the granddaddy of that. I also think, I also had that experience the other day with Demon Worker, which is the game I'll talk about in the next episode. A worker placement game that has an interesting mechanism where you're saving food for the end of the game. So the last game I want to talk about here, right in the last moment, is London Dread. Now, London Dread is a real-time cooperative game in which you're trying to solve this sort of puzzle of navigating the city and having your people in the right spot at the right time in order to solve a puzzle. But then at the end of the game, you have these dice, and you get more dice based on how well you've done. and then you roll the dice to see whether you win or not. And I think the rolling the dice to see whether you win or not really does have that same missed it by that much feel, because often if you had just one more die, if you got just one more success, you would have won or lost if you missed just one more. So there is an element of that almost there, almost got it, that I think works pretty well if you like that kind of ending of a game. That ruined the game for us. I do not like a game where I work really hard to solve a puzzle and then whether I win or not depends on a die roll. That's not my favorite, and it kind of ruined that game for us. But ultimately, it did have that missed it by that much feeling. So listener, what games do you like that have that tightness, that close call? Tell us a story of when you won or lost by just a razor thin margin. And you can do that over in Board Game Geek in Guild 3269, which is the pick up and deliver guild. You could send me an email, Brendan@Rattlebox Games, or send me a direct message on Board Game Geek to user Wombat929, which is also my username on the asynchronous board game platforms if you'd like to play a game. I thank you for joining me on the walk today, and I hope that your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Bye-bye.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.